Have you ever found yourself wondering why certain people treated you as though you were simply not enough? Why they dismissed your presence, undermined your efforts, or made you feel as though you were fading into the background of your own life? I want to share something with you now, a psychological insight so foundational that once you truly absorb it, you will never look at human behavior the same way again. What if the way those people treated you had almost nothing to do with you at all? What if their coldness, their contempt, their cruelty was in truth a mirror reflecting something they could not bear to confront within their own interior world? Stay with me, because by the end of what I share here, you will understand the concealed psychology behind patterns of mistreatment. And more importantly, you will begin to see why these dynamics entered your life in the first place. This is not about assigning fault. This is a journey toward liberation. And the understanding I am about to offer has the power to free you from a cycle you may have been living inside for far longer than you realize. Let us begin with the truth that most people are never told. You have experienced being treated poorly. Perhaps it was a parent who never truly acknowledged your worth. Perhaps it was a partner who reduced you with their words, friends who violated what you thought was trust, or people in positions of authority who worked against you rather than beside you. You have asked yourself, probably more times than you can count, what did I do wrong? Why does this keep happening to me? Is there something fundamentally broken inside me? In the framework of analytical psychology, I want you to hear this clearly. Those questions, as sincere as they are, have been pointed in the wrong direction entirely. The treatment you experienced was neither arbitrary nor a reflection of your inherent value. What I have come to understand through decades of exploring the human psyche is that patterns of cruelty and diminishment follow deeply predictable psychological currents that have nothing to do with what a person is fundamentally worth. And yet, here is where things become more layered, because I also discovered something that many people find deeply uncomfortable to hear. We unconsciously participate in these patterns, not because we want pain, not because we are broken, but because of something inherited, something unexamined, something residing in the deeper strata of the mind, in what I call the unconscious. And until we bring that hidden architecture into the light, we will continue to find ourselves in rooms with the same kinds of people, wondering why the story never seems to change. If you find that resonates, if you have felt that pull toward the familiar, even when the familiar has hurt you, drop the number 11 in the comments below. 11 is a threshold number, a number that appears when you are standing at the edge of a significant shift. And right now, you are. Because I once said something that I believe holds more truth than most people are prepared to receive. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Let that settle for a moment. Do not rush past it. What I have observed through working with countless individuals over the course of my life is that human beings operate from two distinct planes of awareness simultaneously. There is the conscious mind, the part you can access, the thoughts you are aware of having. And then there is the unconscious mind, the vast, submerged architecture that governs as much as 95% of your behavior, your choices, your emotional responses, and the invisible signals you send out into every relationship you enter. The unconscious carries everything you have suppressed, everything you were told was unacceptable, everything that was too painful, too threatening, too shameful to hold in the light. I have a name for this accumulated shadow material: the shadow. And the shadow does not simply sit quietly beneath the surface. It moves, it shapes, it draws people toward you and repels others. It communicates in a language you do not consciously speak, something about what you expect from the world, what you believe you deserve, and what feels emotionally familiar even when it causes harm. Here is the insight that changes everything. The people who treated you poorly were not responding to your conscious intentions or your stated values. They were responding to something invisible, the unresolved material you were unknowingly projecting, your unhealed wounds, the aspects of yourself you had pushed into the darkness. The needs you had been taught were too much. These individuals were drawn to you, and you to them, through a kind of psychological gravity that neither party was aware of. This entire process is completely beneath the surface of awareness. The person who dismissed you or belittled you did not wake up and consciously decide to target you. And you did not consciously invite harm. And yet, the dynamic unfolded, orchestrated by forces neither of you could see. This is what I call the dance of the shadow. And once you recognize it, you cannot unsee it. One of the most revealing truths I have encountered in understanding human relationships is this: we do not see people as they truly are. We encounter them through the aperture of our own unconscious projections. I call this shadow projection, and it is the mechanism at the heart of why patterns of mistreatment persist across different relationships, different circumstances, different chapters of life. Every person carries a shadow, those elements of themselves they have rejected, been told are unworthy, or learned to conceal. Perhaps you were raised in an environment where expressing anger was seen as something base or threatening, so you learned to suppress it completely. Perhaps you were taught, implicitly or explicitly, that your needs were an inconvenience, so you learned to deny them. These rejected elements do not disappear. They descend into the unconscious and wait. And what we cannot own within ourselves, we project outward onto others. But observe the paradox closely. We also attract individuals who appear to embody the very qualities we have disowned. If you suppressed your anger, you will find yourself surrounded by individuals who seem to carry it for you. If you rejected your capacity for strength and self-assertion, you will attract those who use control and dominance. If you silenced your own voice for so long that you forgot what it sounded like, you will draw toward you people who continue that silencing. The individual who treated you poorly was very likely projecting their own shadow material onto you. They perceived something in you that they despised within themselves, something they could not acknowledge as their own, and so they directed that energy outward. This is precisely why those who operate from unconscious patterns so often accuse others of the very things they themselves embody. The individual who manipulates accuses you of being dishonest. The person who is emotionally withholding tells you that you are too needy. The one who is cold and dismissive says you are the difficult one. If that pattern has ever played out in your life, leave 777 in the comments. 777. In numerous wisdom traditions and even in the language of quantum field theory, 777 represents alignment, the moment when inner truth begins to match outer experience. And recognizing this pattern is the first true moment of alignment. But there is a layer beneath this that goes even deeper. And it involves not only what others projected onto you, but why you remained in those dynamics. This is where I want to ask you to stay with me, because this is where genuine transformation becomes possible. I once said that everything which irritates us about others can lead us to a deeper understanding of ourselves. This is where many people feel resistance. Because what I discovered through years of careful observation is something radical. The people who treated you poorly were, in a very specific psychological sense, mirroring your unhealed interior landscape back to you. Before you set this aside, hear me out. This is not about placing responsibility on you for what someone else chose to do. This is about understanding an unconscious mechanism that has kept you in a recurring pattern, not because you are weak, but because the unconscious mind is extraordinarily powerful, and it operates according to its own logic. What I observed is that we unconsciously recreate the emotional atmosphere of our early experiences in our adult relationships. Not because we are drawn to pain, but because the unconscious mind is attempting to resolve what was never resolved. If you were raised by a parent who was emotionally unavailable, who was physically present but somehow always distant, always elsewhere, your psyche registered that absence as the emotional template for what intimacy feels like. And so, as an adult, you find yourself inexplicably drawn to emotionally unavailable partners. Not because you consciously choose this, you likely tell yourself the opposite. But the unconscious operates beneath that narrative, seeking the familiar and hoping, this time, to reach a different ending. This is what I call the repetition compulsion, one of the most compelling forces in the psychology of human relationships. We return to the emotional scene of our early wounding, hoping to rewrite the conclusion. The person who grew up with a critical presence in their home finds critical partners in their adult life. The one whose father left finds companions who eventually withdraw. The individual who learned early that love meant accepting very little continues to accept very little and calls it enough. The people who treated you poorly were not random occurrences. They were, in a very real sense, perfectly chosen participants in a pattern that your unconscious had been rehearsing long before you ever met them. They arrived to play the role of the rejecting figure, the withholding presence, the one who could not see you. Whatever wound had been waiting inside you, looking for the right reflection. And here is the most essential thing to understand. They will continue to arrive in different forms, wearing different faces, carrying different names, until the underlying wound is healed. You may change your city, you may leave the relationship, you may change everything external, but the pattern will follow. I call this fate when we are unconscious of it, and I call it choice when we finally wake up. The question is whether you are ready to wake up, because what I am about to share will show you precisely how. There is something operating even beyond the personal unconscious, beyond your individual history and your individual wounds. I discovered what I call the collective unconscious, a layer of the psyche that is not personal but universal, shared across all of humanity, containing primordial patterns of behavior I named archetypes. These are ancient psychological blueprints: the victim, the persecutor, the rescuer, the tyrant, the one cast out. These figures appear in every culture, in every era, in every corner of human experience, because they are not cultural constructs. They are part of the fundamental architecture of the human psyche. When someone treated you poorly, they were frequently operating from within an archetypal role, and you were inhabiting the corresponding one. This is not entirely personal, it is transpersonal. The authority figure who belittled you was enacting the tyrant archetype. The companion who violated your trust was expressing the shadow aspect of what friendship can hold. The partner who withdrew was participating in an ancient narrative of abandonment that has repeated itself across human history in countless forms. Until we develop awareness of these archetypal structures, we remain caught within them. We step into our assigned role and play it out as though following a script composed long before our birth. What you experienced was not unique to you alone. It was an ancient pattern moving through your life. But here is the empowering truth. Once you can recognize the archetype, you can refuse the role. You can choose not to be the one who is cast out. You can choose not to be the one who disappears. Consciousness is the key that unlocks the door. Pause for a moment and consider what you have just taken in. If something in you is stirring, that quiet recognition that says, "Yes, I have been here before," write 520 in the comments. 520. In the study of resonant fields and wave patterns, 520 represents the frequency at which transformation becomes not just possible, but inevitable. That resonance you feel right now, that is not an accident. Now I want to speak to something that touches almost every person who has experienced repeated patterns of mistreatment. I observed that most people move through the world wearing a carefully constructed mask, a social identity I call the persona. The persona is the version of yourself you believed you had to become in order to be accepted, valued, and safe. It is the daughter who learned never to show her anger because anger brought consequences. It is the man who learned to agree with everything because disagreement felt dangerous. It is the person who became endlessly accommodating because their needs were never met, and they eventually stopped believing their needs were real. The persona is necessary to a degree. We all need ways of navigating social existence. But the persona becomes a psychological prison the moment you lose the awareness that it is only a mask, the moment you forget who lives beneath it. When you are over-identified with your persona, the relationships you attract will reflect the mask, not the person. If your persona is built around the belief that your value lies in what you give to others, you will attract those who take without offering anything in return. If your persona is constructed around the idea that you need nothing and no one, you will attract individuals who confirm that by offering you nothing. The people who treated you poorly were often responding not to who you truly are, but to the performance of who you believed you had to be. They were not attacking you. They were responding to the armor you had constructed, to the mask that had grown so heavy you forgot it was ever a mask. And here is what I have come to understand. Those who operate from unconscious and destructive patterns have a particular sensitivity to inauthenticity. They can detect from a distance when someone is disconnected from their own interior strength. When someone does not fully inhabit their own worth. When someone's boundaries are more performance than reality. The path toward relationships that genuinely nourish you, relationships that honor who you actually are, begins with the gradual, courageous process of setting the mask aside, of letting the real self be visible. This is not a comfortable process. It requires tolerating the discomfort of being seen as you truly are, rather than as you have trained yourself to appear. But as you do this, something remarkable begins to happen. The people who required your inauthenticity in order to remain in relationship with you begin to fall away. Because your authenticity challenges them. Your groundedness in your own worth reveals the absence of their own. Your presence, real, grounded, unperforming, is not something they can remain comfortable with. Now I want to speak directly to why certain people were drawn to you specifically, and why understanding this is not a source of shame, but of extraordinary clarity. Some individuals operate entirely from the shadow, from unacknowledged destructive patterns, from unexamined wounds that have calcified over years into rigid and harmful ways of relating to others. These individuals cannot generate genuine psychological and emotional sustenance from within themselves. So they draw it from others. They consume attention, empathy, emotional responsiveness, the energy that comes from being in relationship with someone who is genuinely feeling, genuinely present, genuinely alive. The more emotionally conscious and empathic you are, the more appealing you become as a source of that energy. This is not a flaw in your character. It is a consequence of your depth. But here is the crucial missing piece. Those who are highly empathic, highly sensitive, highly attuned to the needs and states of others, are frequently disconnected from their own shadow material. They have suppressed their anger, their self-interest, their capacity for appropriate self-protection. And so they attract, with remarkable consistency, individuals who appear to carry those disowned qualities. The individual who manipulated or controlled you was drawn to your interior light, the way a moth moves toward a flame. But they were not seeking to participate in that light. They were seeking to diminish it, because your aliveness, your depth, your sensitivity served as a painful reminder of everything they had surrendered within themselves. Your growth is a threat to those who have refused to grow. Your healing confronts those who have chosen to remain in their wounds. Your boundaries expose the violation that has been occurring. And so they treated you poorly to keep you small, to keep you as unconscious as they needed you to be. But the chapter in which they succeeded has come to an end, because I want to speak now about the counterforce, about the process I consider my most significant contribution to the understanding of human psychological development: individuation. This is the journey toward becoming the person you have always, at the deepest level, actually been. The process of integrating every rejected element of yourself, of moving from an unconscious life, lived in reaction, in repetition, in inherited patterns, to a conscious one. And this is the precise path by which you begin to permanently alter the kinds of relationships and experiences you draw into your life. Individuation requires performing what is perhaps the most demanding act available to a human being: turning toward your own shadow, looking with clear and honest eyes at the parts of yourself you have disowned, the anger you were never allowed to feel, the needs you learned to erase, the strength you surrendered, the voice you silenced, the boundaries you never established because you were not certain you had the right to exist in a way that required them. All of it must be seen, named, and gradually, with patience and with self-compassion, reclaimed. Most people resist this process because it is genuinely difficult. It is easier to focus entirely on what others did to you than to ask the more penetrating question: what within me allowed this to continue? It is more comfortable to remain in the position of the one to whom things simply happen than to reclaim the authorship of your own experience. But those who undertake this work discover something that cannot be described from the outside. It can only be lived. As you integrate your shadow, as you reclaim the rejected parts, you become more whole. And as you become more whole, you cease to carry the unconscious signals that once drew fragmented and harmful people toward you. When you claim your anger, not as aggression, but as appropriate self-regard, you stop attracting those who use anger as a weapon against you. When you honor your own needs, not as demands, but as the natural requirements of a living human being, you stop drawing toward you those who exploit the absence of those needs. When you establish clear and genuine boundaries, not as performance, but as the lived expression of your own worth, you stop inviting those who need your limitlessness in order to feel powerful. The fundamental quality of what you emit into the world is altered at a level that precedes language. And the world, the people in it, the circumstances that arise, responds to that alteration. In the language of quantum field coherence, This is what 108 represents. 108, a number that appears across traditions from Vedic mathematics to modern physics, represents the point of harmonic convergence. The moment when the inner frequency becomes stable enough to reorganize what the outer field reflects back. That is what individuation does. It changes your frequency. Now, because I have always believed that understanding without application is incomplete, I want to offer you the specific framework for beginning this work today. Not as abstract philosophy, as lived practice. The first step is recognition. Most people are so deeply identified with their pain that they cannot yet perceive the pattern they are perpetuating. I ask you to look honestly at your history of relationships, not with judgment, but with the clear eyes of someone who is ready to understand rather than continue. Do you find yourself encountering the same essential dynamic across different people and different circumstances? The same emotional withdrawal, the same dismissal, the same pattern of feeling invisible or not quite enough. Recognition is not self-blame. It is the beginning of freedom. The second step is withdrawing your projections. This means beginning to see the people who have treated you poorly not as villains in your story, but as mirrors. Whatever quality in them provoked the deepest response in you is significant. That intensity of reaction is the shadow speaking. If their dismissiveness enrages you, ask yourself, where have you been dismissive of your own interior life? If their refusal to acknowledge your needs fills you with despair, ask yourself, in what ways have you refused to acknowledge those same needs as valid and real? This is not exoneration of their behavior. This is reclamation of your power. The third step is mourning. This is the step most people bypass in their urgency to move forward, and it is the reason so many people find themselves circling back to the same wounds. You must grieve what was never given to you, the acknowledgement you deserved and did not receive, the care that should have been present and was not, the version of love that should have been yours. These losses that were never mourned continue to bind you to the past with invisible threads. You must mourn what did not occur before you can genuinely create what is still possible. The fourth step is the establishment of genuine boundaries. Not boundaries as a concept you speak about, but boundaries as something you live. Every time you hold a boundary with clarity and self-respect, you are sending a message to your unconscious mind that is more powerful than any affirmation. I matter. My experience is real. I will not accept what diminishes me. Observe what happens in the landscape of your relationships as you begin to live this way. Some people will become uncomfortable and withdraw. Allow them to. The fifth step is the practice of conscious selection. Your unconscious mind will retain its gravitational pull toward familiar patterns for some time. That person who withdraws emotionally will still feel familiar in a way you may confuse with connection. That person who diminishes you will still feel strangely like home. You must learn to override that unconscious pull with conscious discernment. Choose the person whose presence feels unfamiliar, not because they are wrong, but because they are genuinely healthy. Choose the relationship that feels slightly strange precisely because it is actually safe. The sixth step is to build a community of conscious growth. You cannot complete this journey in isolation, and you cannot heal in environments that require you to remain small. Seek out those who are genuinely committed to the work of becoming aware. Trusted counselors, communities built around honest self-examination, companions who reflect your depth back to you rather than trying to extinguish it. These connections will sustain the work through the inevitable moments of difficulty. I want to speak to something that happens partway through this process, something I call the transformation. The point at which everything begins to genuinely shift. The old self begins to dissolve. The identity that was built around being the one who accommodates, who disappears, who accepts what is offered rather than what is deserved, that identity begins to loosen its grip. And this dissolution is accompanied by grief. Even the identities we have outgrown feel like losses when they leave us. Even the patterns that harmed us feel like absences when they are gone. During this period, something predictable often occurs. The people from your previous patterns may re-emerge. They may offer, suddenly and convincingly, precisely what you once longed for from them. This is the moment of truth, the final examination of whether the transformation is real. Most people, in the initial passage through this threshold, return. They offer one more chance. They believe that this time the story will be different. But genuine transformation means something specific. Recognizing that you have changed and that who you are becoming no longer fits into the space you once occupied. The old circumstances will feel confining. The old relationships will feel like rooms with insufficient air. The old patterns will feel intolerable. This very discomfort is not a sign that something is wrong. It is evidence that something has finally gone right. I once said that there is no coming to consciousness without pain. You are living that now. Every moment of discomfort in this process is not evidence of failure. It is the sensation of genuine evolution. Begin this evening with a shadow journal. Each night, write down what provoked a reaction in you during the day. Who unsettled you? What behavior triggered a response that felt disproportionate? Then ask yourself, what does this reveal about what I have not yet fully owned within myself? This practice builds the capacity for self-awareness more rapidly than almost any other. It is how you make the unconscious conscious, not as a philosophical ideal, but as a daily lived discipline. Dedicate 15 minutes each day to a practice of interior stillness, meditation, quiet contemplation, whatever form of spacious awareness works for you. In that space, visualize yourself speaking what you were never able to say, establishing the limits you never allowed yourself to hold, responding to the people in your life not from the wounded child within you, but from the conscious adult you are becoming. This gradually reprograms the unconscious in a way that makes the work of change real, not just conceptual. Develop what I call the witness, the capacity to observe your own patterns without becoming consumed by them. When you feel that familiar pull towards someone or something that you recognize as harmful, pause. Notice the pull. Say to yourself, "This is the old wound seeking the familiar. But I am not only that wound,